Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's been generating quite a bit of buzz lately,
Oh, yeah.
the idea of a single world government.
Hmm.
We've got some really interesting sources to dig into, starting with that little online exchange between Elon Musk and Paul Graham.
Okay.
And then we're going to see what the folks over on Reddit have to say about it too.
Sounds good.
So buckle up, because we're about to go deep on this one. Let's
Yeah.
kick things off with Elon Musk's pretty strong statement on X. You know, the one where he said a single world government would be a nightmare from which there would be no escape.
Right.
Whoa. Talk about painting a picture.
Yeah.
I mean, he really doesn't hold back, does he?
No, he doesn't.
Nightmare, no escape. It's like he's tapping into some deep-seated fear we all have.
Definitely.
And looking at the Reddit thread, it seems like a lot of people share that fear. There were tons of comments echoing those concerns about losing freedom and privacy.
Yeah, a lot of folks were worried about that.
And then there were some who even compared a single world government to, or, the biblical mark of the beast prophecy.
Oh, wow.
Now, that one's interesting. Why do you think that particular image came up in this context?
Well, I think it really speaks to that fear of, ultimate control, like a centralized power, having this ability to dictate every aspect of your life.
Yeah, right down to being able to buy or sell things.
Right, exactly.
It's a pretty powerful image, especially for those who are familiar with that belief system.
It definitely is.
And it highlights just how much anxiety surrounds this idea of losing your autonomy under a single world government. But then we've got Paul Graham chiming in, and his response kind of throws a wrench into all those doomsday predictions.
Yeah, he brings up a whole other angle.
He says, we can't assume that if we had a single world government, the world would look like Europe and grow like America. More likely, it would look like America and grow like Europe. Now, that's a different set of concerns, isn't it?
It is.
He's not necessarily denying the dystopian possibility.
Yeah.
But he's raising this point about the structure and policies of this hypothetical government being absolutely crucial.
Right.
And he uses this really clever comparison to get his point across.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
Okay, so break this down for me. What's the difference between those two outcomes that he's talking about? America looking like Europe versus Europe growing like America?
Well, think about it. The U.S. is often associated with, fast economic growth and innovation, but sometimes at the expense of things like social safety nets and income equality. Europe, on the other hand, tends to prioritize social welfare and work-life balance,
Right.
but maybe with slower economic growth.
Okay, so Graham's basically saying we can't just assume we'd get the best of both worlds.
Exactly. We have to consider the trade-offs.
And I'm seeing some of those same anxieties playing out in the Reddit comments too,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it comes to existing international organizations like the UN, the WHO, and the World Bank.
Yeah.
Some users are worried that those organizations are already like a stepping stone to a single world government.
I can see why they'd think that.
I mean, they already have a hand in setting economic policies, health regulations, even intervening in conflicts.
They do have a lot of influence.
But others were quick to point out that these organizations rely on cooperation and consensus from member states.
Right.
They don't actually have the authority to enforce their decisions globally.
That's true.
What do you think? Is that a realistic assessment of their power right now?
Well, they definitely wield a lot of influence, but they lack the absolute power that usually defines a true governing body. Their effectiveness really hinges on individual nations' willingness to play ball.
Yeah, and we've seen plenty of examples where that cooperation just falls apart.
Exactly.
Okay, but then there's this one comment that caught my eye.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one too.
The one suggesting a single world government on Mars. With Elon Musk at the helm, of course.
Of course.
Now, that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel.
It does, doesn't it?
But it does raise some interesting questions.
Yeah, like what would a government look like if it wasn't burdened by Earth's history?
Exactly. It's like starting fresh.
Right, a clean slate.
And it seems like Musk's name just keeps popping up in this whole conversation.
Yeah, he's a big part of it.
There are even comments speculating about whether he, with companies like SpaceX and Neuralink, might be intentionally or unintentionally shaping the future of governance.
That's an interesting thought.
Whether on Earth or beyond. Do you think there's any merit to that idea, or are people giving him too much credit?
Well, it's true that his companies are pushing the boundaries in so many fields. Space travel, AI, even human augmentation.
All areas with huge potential to impact society and the way we govern ourselves.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's not so far-fetched to think he could play a significant role in how all this unfolds,
It's definitely possible.
even if it's not some master plan.
Right, more like a ripple effect from his other ventures.
That's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we talk about it, the more likely it becomes.
Interesting.
And speaking of prophecies, those science fiction analogies that popped up in the Reddit thread were
Yeah.
pretty fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Those were fun.
You had people comparing a potential single world government to everything from the Utopian Federation in Star Trek to the tyrannical galactic empire in Star Wars.
It's like people are using those fictional worlds to explore their hopes and fears about the future.
Exactly. And those analogies highlight just how wide the spectrum of possibilities really is.
Right.
From a cooperative and peaceful global society to a dystopian regime where individual freedom is non-existent.
It makes you wonder, are we just hardwired to think in these extremes when we imagine a unified world?
That's a great question, and it makes me think about how much of this conversation is driven by fear versus hope. Is a single world government something to be feared, or could it be the key to solving some of humanity's biggest challenges?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's a lot to unpack, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, it really is a complex issue. And you know what strikes me is this whole conversation, it's like we're walking this tightrope between fear and hope.
You're so right. It's like we're drawn to the idea of a unified world, but then terrified of what it might actually look like.
Yeah, it's that classic human dilemma, isn't it? We want security and stability, but we also want to hold on to our individuality and freedom.
So when this idea of a single world government comes up, those instincts kind of clash.
Exactly. And the more we dig into these Reddit threads, you see those contrasting perspectives playing out.
Yeah.
On one hand, you've got that fear of centralized power becoming tyrannical, like Big Brother controlling every aspect of our lives.
Right.
But then on the other hand, there's this glimmer of hope. Like maybe a unified global entity could actually tackle those huge challenges that individual nations just can't seem to solve.
Like climate change or global pandemics.
Exactly, those issues that just don't care about borders.
So some people are arguing that a single world government might be more efficient, more decisive in dealing with those kinds of threats.
Right. They point to the limitations of international cooperation as it is now, where things get bogged down by bureaucracy and conflicting interests.
Makes sense. But then you've got the counter-argument, the one that gets to the heart of those dystopian fears. What if that centralized power becomes corrupt?
That's a big concern.
What if it's more interested in staying in control than actually helping people?
And that fear is definitely not unfounded. I mean, history is full of examples of power being abused.
Yeah.
That's why so many comments emphasize the need for safeguards, checks and balances to prevent a single world government from becoming oppressive.
It's like that age-old question, how do you balance individual freedom with collective security? Can you even have both?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one we'll probably keep wrestling with as technology advances and the world gets more connected.
Speaking of technology, that's another thread that keeps coming up. There are a lot of people worried about a single world government controlling things like AI and bioengineering, using them to monitor and manipulate entire populations.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? The potential for those technologies to be used for good or evil is huge.
Right, and in the hands of a single global entity, the stakes are even higher.
Definitely.
But then you also have those who see technology as a potential solution. They argue that if used responsibly, these advancements could empower individuals, make a global government more transparent and accountable.
So it's like technology could either centralize power or distribute it. It all comes down to how it's developed and used.
So maybe the question isn't whether a single world government is inherently good or bad, but how do we make sure technology is used to promote freedom and well-being?
Right, not control and oppression.
Which brings us back to individual choice and action. Even in a world with powerful technologies and maybe even a centralized government, we still have agency.
I do.
We can choose how we engage with technology, what information we consume, what values we prioritize.
And those individual choices, when you multiply them across millions of people, they can have a huge ripple effect.
Exactly. We might not be able to single-handedly prevent a single world government from happening, but we can influence its shape and direction through our choices, our voices, our actions.
Absolutely, and it seems like that's resonating with a lot of the Reddit commenters, the sense that even with these huge global shifts, individual agency still matters.
It's kind of empowering, isn't it? This idea that we're not just passive bystanders.
We're active participants. Our choices matter.
It reminds me of that quote by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
I love that quote. It reminds us that we don't have to wait for permission to make a difference.
We can start right now in our own communities
Hmm.
by engaging in thoughtful dialogue, challenging our own assumptions, working together to create a better future.
Exactly.
So maybe that's the takeaway here. This conversation about a single world government, it's not just some abstract thought experiment.
It's a call to action.
It's a reminder that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together through our choices and actions.
And even if we never actually see a single world government in our lifetime, engaging with these ideas can make us more informed, more engaged citizens of the world we live in right now.
It can push us to think more critically about the challenges we face and the solutions we come up with. I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground, from those anxieties about losing freedom to the hopeful possibilities of a more unified and effective global system.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what really stands out to you from all this?
I think for me, what's most fascinating is how much this whole single world government debate hinges on our views of human nature.
Oh, definitely.
Like, are we naturally cooperative or competitive? Can we actually overcome our tribal instincts and work together for the greater good?
Those are like the big questions, aren't they?
Yeah, and those assumptions really color how people see the potential outcomes of a unified global system.
Right. Some see it as this path to peace and progress. Others see it as a straight shot to tyranny.
And that brings us back to those Reddit threads, all those passionate arguments and different viewpoints.
It's a perfect example of the larger debate.
You see the same hopes and fears in the comments, the same struggle to balance freedom and collective action.
It's like this whole conversation is forcing us to confront those fundamental tensions within ourselves. Like, can we as individuals and as a global community find that balance?
It's a tough one, and there are no easy answers.
No, but that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not about finding the right answer. It's about exploring the complexity, challenging our assumptions, opening ourselves up to new perspectives.
So for someone listening to all this, what would you say is the most important thing to take away?
Hmm. I'd say it's the future isn't set in stone.
Hmm.
It's not something that just happens to us. We have a role to play in shaping it.
Individually and collectively.
Exactly. The choices we make today, the actions we take, the conversations we have, they all matter. They all contribute to creating the world we want to live in.
It's like we're all architects designing the blueprints for the future. And we have to decide what kind of world we want to build, what values are important, and what legacy we leave behind.
And that brings me to one final thought, something to ponder as you keep exploring this topic.
Okay.
We've talked about how a single world government could emerge from existing organizations, from technology, or even from some big global crisis.
Right.
But what if the most powerful force for change isn't any of those things? What if it comes from within us?
What do you mean?
What if the real revolution starts with a shift in consciousness? Our realization that we're all connected, that our well-being depends on the well-being of everyone and everything on this planet.
That's a powerful idea. It's like a call to action to change ourselves as much as we try to change the world.
Exactly, because the world we create will ultimately reflect who we are. So let this deep dive be a starting point for your own exploration.
I like that.
Think about what kind of future you want to see, what values are important to you, and what you can do right now to start making that vision a reality.
Those are some great questions to consider. Thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
And everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity and given you some food for thought.